Okay, so today we're going to start working with more and more complex surfaces. So last class we did our freeform, our cushions, and so as we move forward today, we're going to start dealing with topography, which by itself is a very complicated surface. We're going to, the next assignment that we're going to have will deal with topography. You'll actually make a physical cardboard model of a piece of topography. Today's, but really just getting our feet wet. But the next three classes are pretty important, especially next week. Next week I'll take you through the whole process of how to create a physical model out of this piece of topography, and how to cut it up and how to work with it, etc. So I think it's a really good skill to have, and I'll walk you through it. And it's also something that I continue to get feedback saying that was a really valuable thing that you taught me when people move on to Berkeley or Cal Poly, knowing that they can do this quickly and easily is a good thing. Today we're going to just work to create a piece of terrain, and then you'll be free to build whatever it is that you want to build on top of it, which hopefully you'll have some fun doing. We're gonna get our terrain today from SketchUp because they have geolocation built in. The SketchUp terrain information is not the best in the world. It's not the most accurate, but it gives us some place to start from. If you were really working on a real site, you would have a civil engineer come out and do a land survey of that particular site. You'd have very specific information about where the contours were, and you would be building your site based on that contour information, not going to Google and downloading that information, because it's not that accurate. However, for our purposes, it's a piece of terrain. It's a complex surface that we can work with. The bad news about SketchUp Terrain is that it comes in as a non-NURBS polygon surface. And so Rhino likes to work with NURBS. It's nice, smooth, mathematically driven curvature data. Basically, in SketchUp, it's a triangulated, faceted surface. So it's a bunch of triangles that go together. We will create a smooth surface out of it, which yet again approximates. It's probably some kind of Amber Alert or something. Oh, there you go. We're probably all going to end up getting it momentarily. Either that or I'm just not important enough. One or the other. Yeah. Well. Anyway, continuing on, I'm glad some of you got notified by the president. Apparently, I did not.
You're the lucky one then.
Yeah, apparently. So anyway, we're going to work with this surface. We're going to smooth it out, etc. But as much as I don't want to have to open SketchUp in this class, we are going to open SketchUp today. I'm going to double-click on SketchUp 2018 to open that one up. That's the current version that's on these computers. This is going to continue to happen, yeah. Eventually, I'm going to get it. Maybe. Anyway, we're going to continue on. I'm going to use the architectural design feet and inches as my template, and I'll go ahead and start using SketchUp. There we go. This, by the way, is only available in SketchUp Pro. They used to have it available in the regular version of SketchUp, but they decided to strip it out and try to get you to pay for it instead. So it's here. We're going to go to the File menu. Actually, before we get started, I'm going to delete the little lady here. She doesn't need to be part of this. I'll go to the File menu. I'm going to go to Geolocation and then Add Location. And so this is where we're going to search for a specific location. Pick something that has some hills to it. Don't pick like the DVC campus. That's not enough hill. We want like real mountains. So go into the Sierras, pick Lake Tahoe. Go to Yosemite, pick Yosemite. The only challenge with Yosemite is if you pick like Half Dome, doing the contours on the side of Half Dome is not the best thing. So you might pick something, go to Hawaii, pick something in Hawaii. It doesn't really matter. I went ahead and I zoomed in on Mount Diablo. So it came up here. And of course, it's going to work really slowly. There's the East Bay. I zoomed in on Mount Diablo, figuring I'd be able to get something. Now, at some point as you zoom in, you're going to see this white square box that shows up. When that white square shows up, that's the most data that you can take at one time. So as you zoom in, that white box gets a little bit bigger. And at some point, you'll zoom in and the white box goes away altogether. you want to make sure that you're at least seeing the size of that box-ish. So there it is. And I'll go ahead and take this piece of terrain data. I'll pick that piece. And I'll do that by clicking on Select Region. I can make my region a full square there. For some reason, it starts off a little bit smaller. And of course, I could take a smaller chunk if I wanted a smaller chunk. But I'll go ahead and take the full thing. When I'm done, I'll go ahead and click Grab. And this loves to slow down SketchUp a little bit, so we're going to hang out and wait while it brings this information in. It's interesting. I feel like it got slower in 2018 from 2017, so go figure. Once I've brought it in, it looks like a flat file here. However, it does contain actual topo information. If you go to File and then Geolocation and say Show Terrain, it will show you the terrain itself. So there's the terrain. Perfect. Now I need to bring this into Rhino. And I'm going to do that by saving it, but instead of just saving it as a SketchUp 2018, we're going to go back a bit. I'm going to go to File and then Save As. And I'm going to go back in time to SketchUp maybe 2013. 2015 might work. It depends on how recently they updated on these computers Rhino. So 2015 might work. We could give it a shot and see. We'll call this Mount Diablo. And I need to save it on my flash drive. The important thing there is that the current version, 2018, isn't going to work. So we need to save back a little bit. So let's put it into today's folder. And there's Mount Diablo. So that's saved. I'm going to leave it open just in case the version didn't work. And I'll open up Rhino, which I already have open. This was, again, a large object inches template, which got Rhino fully open. Now I need to go ahead and bring that terrain information into Rhino. So I'll go to File and then Import. So I'm not inserting a block instance or anything. I'm just straight up importing it. So I'll go to File and then Import. And I'll go find on my flash drive there's Mount Diablo. And we'll go ahead and say Open. The SketchUp import options, we'll bring it in as a mesh. That's fine. And the rest of these are all fine. We'll go ahead and say OK. Yep. So it didn't like the recent version of SketchUp. That's what I was afraid of. So we will go back to 2013. I'm going to go Save As. I'm going to go back to 2013. Save. So the topography is under Geolocation, add terrain or something like that. It's not there anymore because I already have added it. What, add location? Thank you. OK, so we'll try bringing that in again. I'll go to File and then Import. And there you go. 2013 brings it in. I don't see much because it's much, much bigger than where I was looking. So there it is. I can see it. If I switch my view into shaded mode, I can see it in shaded mode there. Now, when it comes in, I end up with two different surfaces. SketchUp exports the flat surface and the terrain surface. I can get rid of the flat surface, or I can put it on a layer and turn it off. Either way. Organizing this is helpful. So let me go ahead and put it on layer 1. I'll right-click and say Change Object Layer, and I'll turn that one off. This, my SketchUp terrain, probably came in on layer 0. Yep. So let me rename layer 0 to be SketchUp surface. You can call it anything you want. And I'm also going to clean up some of these other layers. I have some Google Earth layers that don't have anything on them. We'll get rid of them. And I could clean up some of these other layers. That default was the layer that I was working on. Let me rename that. I'm going to call that, let's see, I'll do Contour X. OK, so as I look at this surface, and I can zoom in here a little bit. Let's look at this ridge. You can see that it's made up of all these triangular facets, which means that we get, along these ridges, we get these little depressions where the way that the triangles come together. Do you guys see that? It's not a smooth surface, and ultimately we want it to go from being this into being a nice smooth surface. We're going to do a curved network of this surface, but before we do that, we need to get some defining curves. So certainly I could get the edge curves by saying dupe edge, and I could go around and I could get all of the little edge curves. But this would take a lot to go through and select them all. So instead, we're going to use a command called contour. And what contour does is it creates a set of parallel lines that intersect this particular surface. So I have a layer called contour X. I'm going to do another layer called contour Y a little bit later. But we'll start with contour X. I'm going to go to the curve from objects, contour. Or you could simply type contour into the command line. And when I do that, it's going to ask first to select objects for contours. I'm going to select this surface as my object, and I'll press enter. Next, it says contour plane base point. I'll pick one of the corners here. Now, it won't let me snap to that corner because I don't have my object snap on, and I also don't have, I'm either going to turn on knot or vertex because this is a mesh. So vertex there at the bottom will let me snap to that point. There we go. That's my base point, and my direction perpendicular to the contour planes. So direction perpendicular to the contour planes, essentially what I want to do is I want to go off in the x direction here, just straight. And so I'll turn on ortho, and I'll go off in the x direction. I'm not snapping to anything, I'm just off in space here, right along the x-axis. I'll go ahead and click. When I've done that, it asks me for the distance between the contours. Now, I don't want it to do it at 1 inch because this is a really large surface. So I'm probably going to start at maybe 100 feet. So I'll type in 100 feet, and we'll see how close together they are. OK, that's pretty good, 100 feet. Our target is somewhere around the size of these squares of the SketchUp data. If we go more intense than that, if I did more than 100, if I did 200, it would be too much data. I don't need that much. If I did less, if I did 5 or 500, then I'd end up with too few contours. So it's kind of a happy medium. I'm guessing it's going to be about 100. And now I have all of those lines that run along the surface. So let me deselect here. So those lines are defining part of this surface. Now I'm going to run the contours in the opposite direction. So I'm going to create another layer, and we'll call this contour Y. Let me turn back on my SketchUp, and I'm going to initiate the contour command again. So I'll go to curve from objects, contour. I'll select my surface. I'll press enter. I'll start at the same corner, and this time I'll go off in space along the y-axis. And when I do that, I'll again pick 100 feet. I'll hit enter, and that gives me that set of curves. Now, some of you, hold on, I bet I'm going to guess what your question is. Some of you will have done this, and oops, I forgot to change my layer. Let me back up for a second. I forgot to change my layer. That was my mistake. Some of you will have your curve selected that you created in the last command, like this, and you'll immediately go to contour. And when you create this contour, going this way, and hit enter, you'll end up with, well, it did a great job of not doing it for me. You should end up with a bunch of little points. And that's not what you want. We don't want a bunch of points. We actually want these lines. And I apologize that for some reason it decided not to do it for me. But if we do it that way where we get the points, it's useless data. It's not going to help us out. And you'll end up having to delete the points. I'm trying to figure out why it didn't do it, though. Try it one more time here. There it is. I must have typed something wrong. If you get this, that's a bad sign. We don't want all those little points. So if that happens and you happen to deselect the points, like this, rather than going in and trying to pick all of those points. It's 1,000 points, by the way. Type SELPT for select points. It'll select all the points, and then you can press the delete key and make those go away. There we go. So let me switch to my contour Y as my active layer. Let's do that contour again, but I'm going to contour the surface, not the lines. So I'll initiate contour, select my surface. We'll start at that same corner. We'll go off in space this way, and that gives me another set of lines. I can turn off my surface, and I can see a network of lines that fairly accurately represent the surface. So you can see where I'm going with this. Ultimately, we're going to create a curved network. The problem is that a curved network likes consistently closed edges, and I've got a bunch of rough edges on the sides here. Let's look at it in the top view. So I'll switch from perspective over into top. And if I zoom out, we can see that there's the kind of the ragged edge along there. Let's go ahead and trim that edge off. So I'll make it easy on myself. I'll pick that curve. I'll type trim. And I can actually click and drag all the way through and delete all of those at once. Let me do the trim again. We'll trim from this one, and I'll go ahead and select a few more of these. There we go. Trim. And we'll trim those off, those off, those off. That last line I do have to delete. And now if I'm looking down at this, I have a nice border curve that goes all the way around. And I have what's ready to become a very nice curved network. So with all these curves, before I actually create the curved network, I'm going to create a new layer. And we can call this terrain. We'll make that the active layer. And then I'll go ahead and select my curves and go to surface and then curve network. It's going to give us this error that's going to say, are you sure you want to do it with more than 100 curves? We'll go ahead and say yes, go ahead. And we've got our standard default setups here. It's recognizing A, B, C, and D, so that this is going to make a nice curved network. I can go ahead and say OK. And this part does take a little while, so be patient. OK, so there it is. It finished. And I can tell that it finished because where the surface shows up is kind of this dark black object. You'll also notice at this point that Rhino gets really slow. That's to be expected. What I'll do is I'll click off so that nothing's selected and wait. Then I'll click on the black, and it'll select the surface. This is the surface. If I were to zoom in very slowly, we'd get to the point where we could see the surface. Like I said, it's really slow. And that's because of the accuracy and the density of this surface. And as we zoom in, we can start to see all of that. Truth is, we don't need it to be this accurate. So I'll start, once it's selected, by typing the rebuild command. It's also available under Edit and then Rebuild. So you could come up here and Edit and Rebuild. And I'm going to change the point count. And this first one, I'm going to change it to, I don't know, I'll do it at 200 by 200. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And as soon as I do that, it'll be back and easy to work with. I changed the density of the surface. And I didn't lose too much accuracy by doing that. I'm going to do some comparisons so you can see that rebuild in just a second. And you can see what it does to your piece of terrain. So let me turn off my contour X and contour Y. I have just my terrain. This terrain I'm going to modify and call it terrain 200. Let me create another layer, and I'll call this terrain 100. And again, this is not something you have to do. I'm going to use this for illustration purposes. Terrain 50. And the last one will be terrain 10. OK, so I have my 200 here. I'm going to copy it, transform, copy, or type copy in place. And I'm going to move it onto the 100 layer, change object layer. And now I have the terrain 200 and the terrain 100 both as separate little objects. Let me make terrain 100 active. There we go. So with this, I'll rebuild at 100 by 100. So let me rebuild. And instead of 200 by 200, we'll say 100 by 100. And you see that the grid that represents the surface gets a little bit more spread. Now, if I were to turn, let me turn this to a color. So terrain 200 has a little bit of color on it. Terrain 100 is gray. And you can see as they overlap, there are parts of the terrain where the gray is on top, and there's parts where the green is on top. So the 100 rebuild has smoothed some of the contours out just a little bit. And if you look specifically at the tops of ridges or in the bottoms of valleys, you can start to see that smoothing occur. Let me turn off the 200 for a second. There you go. You can still see some of the artifacts of the triangles. There's one, there's one. You guys kind of see that a little bit? So it's not perfectly smooth, but it's a lot better than it was. Yeah?
I'm still having trouble doing the curve network.
Is it saying unable to sort curves?
Yeah.
OK, I'll come help you. So now, let me copy this, and I'm going to do it at 50. So I'll go to transform, copy, in place. We'll change it to the 50. Change object layer. And I'm going to rebuild. This one will be 50 by 50. And it smooths out even more. If I turned on the 200 by contrast, you can see that it's really starting to smooth out lots of the pieces. The ridges are getting a lot smoother. I can turn off the terrain. There you go. If I'm looking at the ridges, they're looking a lot smoother. This looks pretty good as a surface. I could take it a step further. Once again, I'll copy it in place. We'll put it on terrain 10. Bless you. There we go. And I'll do a rebuild of this one. Instead of 50, we'll do it at 10. It's OK. And now it's smoothed out a lot more. So as I look at this surface, a lot of the detail of the valley is lost versus the terrain 50, where I'm seeing a lot more. So there's a happy medium as to which level is the right number of rebuilds. It's probably somewhere in the 100 or 50 range, so that it's smooth enough, but not overly smooth. And so I like to show you this by contrast so you can see. Sometimes it's easiest to see it along the edge. And so you can see there's a little bit between 50 and 100, and a lot between 50 and 10 in terms of change. So let me go back to the 100. I'll turn the rest of them off. And now I have this particular surface. OK, so now that I've done that particular surface, I'm going to do a few more things. And this is, again, just kind of practice using the contour command. I'm going to contour this surface in the vertical direction. So I did the surface in the x direction and the y direction. Now that I have the surface the way I want it to, I'm going to cut like topo lines out of the surface. And so I'll go back to the contour command. It's available under curve, curve from objects, contour. I'll pick my surface. Actually, before I do this, I should change my layer. So hold on for a second. We'll call this topo lines. Make it active. And then we're going to contour this surface. So type contour or go to curve, curve from objects, contour. I'll select my surface. There we go. contour base point, we'll pick one of those corners again. I no longer have the ability to snap to vertex because this is not a mesh, it's a NURBS surface. I can snap to the end, however. There it is. And I don't want it to be in the X, or I guess it would be the X or the Y. I want it to be going straight up in the Z. So I may have to switch my view into one of the side views to get it to go straight up. There it is, going straight up. And now I'll type my distance between the contours. Typically, this is somewhere, if it's a USGS map, it would be every 40 feet. It depends on how steep your terrain is as to how frequently you want to do this. I'll do it every 10 feet just so that you can see it. So I'll type in 10 feet. And let me make the perspective view a little bit active so you can see this happen here. There you go, 10 feet, and I'll hit enter. And it's going to slice this piece of terrain up into little intervals that are 10 feet apart. And somehow watching it in animation like this helps you see what's happening. So there you go. There's all of my little contours. I could turn off now the surface, and I'd be left with just all of the individual little contours that represent the surface, like that. If I wanted to be able to laser cut this or print this, I don't want it to be three-dimensional anymore. So I'll do one more layer, and I'll call this flat topo. I'll make that one active. And I'm going to use the project command to get these all flat. So I'll give myself a surface that is larger than I picked the wrong one, sorry. Here we go. Perfect. And I'm going to switch into the top view, and I'm going to use the project command. So I'll go to curve, curve from objects, project, or type project. Select curves and points to project. It will be all those contour lines. And I want those to project onto this surface. And we'll let it finish here. There it is. And we can now look at them in 3D, and we can see that those are the flat set of contour lines. So I worked my way from the 3D model all the way down to creating a flat set of contour lines that I could print or work with or export to AutoCAD, etc. So I'm just trying to show you this process in kind of loose terms. We'll define this up far more specifically going forward next class. Everything that I did today, all the way from SketchUp bringing it through, I will repeat again 2 more times. So next week, I'll do the same thing that I did today. I'll move a little faster through it, and then I'll show you the next half, which is the next piece of actually working with this. So what I'm looking for today is a view. You could just do a screen capture of the topo lines, proving that you got it. I think that's what I asked for. And then also 2 renders or prints that capture the essence of your meditation pavilion design. So this is where you get to have some fun and play with something. I've had people in the past build giant bridges and whatever. So whatever sounds fun to you, go for it. I want you to get through, and then I want you to have a little bit of fun today working on something out of your head, some kind of a little design piece. It's important that you really understand how the contour command works. Typically, people run into snags where when you try to do the curve network, you get the, something's wrong. Do you want me to sort the curves? Chances are, when you did the contour, they weren't exactly on the X or Y axis. They were slightly up in space, and it caused the contours to get off. If you look at those contours in X and Y, let me turn these off for a second. If you look at the contours in X and Y and you have them on, you should be able to see them in the side view as a bunch of parallel lines. So let me turn here. You'll see it in the front view here. They should look like this in the front view, where they're all parallel. And if I switched and put the Y's on and looked at them in the right view, they should look like that. If they're on an angle, something went wrong during the contour. So that's typically where people go wrong. So I want you to work around with this, and then next class we'll spend a lot more time. I'll also give you the actual assignment 202, where you'll get the first part, you'll see where we're going. If you work today and you end up not liking your terrain and want to pick a new terrain next class, that's okay. Today's just kind of a practice round. Are there any other questions? No? All right, I'll turn you guys loose.